The country was moving through a time of strong emotions, and almost everyone could feel it, whether they followed politics closely or not. People argued not only in news studios and public discussions, but also in quiet living rooms, family kitchens, and group chats among friends. Many were tired of hearing about politics, yet they could not escape it. The news was everywhere, on television, on phones, and in everyday conversations. The United States had always been a place of strong opinions, but now it felt like those opinions had turned into firm walls. People were no longer just disagreeing. They were standing on opposite sides, holding on tightly to what they believed was completely right. Donald Trump, even after leaving the White House, remained a powerful presence in the minds of millions. Some people saw him as a leader who spoke directly and refused to hide behind polite language. Others believed he created confusion, division, and disorder. Whether they supported him or opposed him, very few could ignore him. His speeches, interviews, and statements spread quickly, shared through screens and loud conversations. It was almost as if the country could not fully move forward, because his name kept returning to the center of attention. At the same time, the Supreme Court was facing unusual levels of public attention. For many years, the court had been seen as something distant, serious people in black robes working quietly, far away from all the loud arguments happening in politics. It was a place people imagined as being steady and calm, where decisions were based on law and fairness. Yet now the court seemed to be pulled into the same storm that surrounded the country. People began to speak about the court, not just as judges, but as symbols of larger ideas. To some, the court represented protection, an anchor during a time of strong political winds. To others, the court seemed to be stepping closer to the political stage, whether by choice or by pressure. News channels and online discussions began to examine the backgrounds of the judges, their past decisions, and their personal beliefs. There were debates about what a judge should be, someone neutral and quiet, or someone who understood the passions of the nation. This shift did not happen all at once. It grew slowly, each important ruling adding a new layer of emotion to public opinion. When the court made a decision connected to elections, presidential power, or investigations, the reactions were immediate. Supporters of Donald Trump often celebrated these rulings as proof that he had been treated unfairly in the past, believing the court was correcting mistakes. Meanwhile, his opponents viewed the same decisions with worry, feeling that these rulings gave him the ability to return to influence or avoid responsibility. People began to say that the court was not just interpreting laws. They said the court was shaping the future of the country. For some, that brought hope. For others, it brought concern. What made the situation even more intense was the speed of communication. Social media turned every decision into a wave of reactions. Discussions, jokes, arguments, and emotional statements flooded the public conversation. It was hard to pause and think carefully when the world was reacting so quickly. In certain neighborhoods, friends who once enjoyed spending time together began avoiding discussions that could lead to disagreements. A simple statement could turn into a long debate. Some were surprised by how strongly people they cared about felt on these issues. Families sometimes found themselves carefully choosing their words during dinner conversations. People felt that their beliefs were connected to something deeper than politics. They were tied to identity, values, and the future of the country. Meanwhile, the news was full of predictions about the next election and what role the Supreme Court might play in shaping it. Reporters and analysts tried to explain legal language to the general public, which was not always easy to understand. Many viewers tried to follow the reasoning in the rulings but found the details complicated. Still, the emotional meaning behind the decisions was clear enough for everyone to understand. Whatever the court decided had the potential to affect not just leaders, but ordinary people. In communities across the country, individuals could feel a sense of uncertainty. They wondered what would happen next. Some believed that strong disagreements were normal and even healthy in a democracy. Others felt that the country was reaching a breaking point where trust was slipping away. A question was quietly forming in the minds of many. How do you hold a nation together when so many people feel differently about what is right and fair? Trump's continued influence added another layer to the situation. His speeches attracted large crowds both in person and online. His words could energize his supporters, giving them confidence and a sense of belonging. At the same time, the same speeches could upset those who disagreed, making them worry about where the country was headed. The Supreme Court, even though it did not respond to public reactions, became part of conversations around these speeches. People would say that one could not talk about Trump without also talking about the court, and one could not talk about the court without talking about Trump. For many people, this new reality felt exhausting. They wished for a time when news did not feel like a constant emotional challenge. Some missed a sense of unity, even if that unity had never been perfect. Others felt motivated to speak more, vote more, and get involved. The tension itself became part of society's everyday rhythm, quietly shaping moods, decisions, and relationships. Yet beneath all the noise, there was also a gentle hope that things could eventually settle. People believed that calm could return, even if they could not see exactly how it would happen. Some placed hope in community discussions, where people listened to one another. Others placed hope in future leaders who might bring new ideas. Some believed that time itself might soften the sharpness of the current moment. The nation was not broken, but it was strained. It stood at a moment where trust felt uncertain, emotions were strong, and every decision seemed larger than life. This was the world in which the story begins, a world of voices, opinions, and hearts searching for clarity. And in this world, the Supreme Court and Donald Trump continued to influence not only politics, but the everyday feelings of the people themselves. The discussions about the Supreme Court grew stronger when several important cases reached the national spotlight. These cases did not only involve small disagreements or distant legal issues. They touched on matters that shaped how the country understood leadership, responsibility, and the rule of law. Because of this, every decision the court made seemed to carry more weight than ever before. The court had always been responsible for interpreting the Constitution, something many people respected deeply. Yet now, whenever it made a ruling, people reacted as if the court had chosen a side in a national discussion. News programs would invite experts to explain what each decision might mean for future elections, for presidential authority, or for accountability. These discussions were meant to help the public understand, but they often added to the feeling of urgency and stress surrounding the court. One of the major reasons the court received so much attention was because its rulings came at a time when trust in many institutions was already low. Some citizens believed that the government no longer represented them. Others felt frustrated by the fast pace of news where every day brought a new headline. When the court released decisions on cases connected to Donald Trump, the reactions were immediate and emotional. People interpreted the rulings in ways that reflected their own beliefs and hopes for the country. Supporters of Trump were encouraged by some of these decisions. They saw them as signs that he had been treated unfairly in the past, and that the legal system was now recognizing this. To them, the court appeared to be restoring balance. They felt relieved, believing that the system still allowed their viewpoints to be heard. On the other hand, those who opposed Trump felt concerned. They believed that the court's rulings could give him more space to return to political influence. Some feared that the decisions could weaken accountability for powerful individuals. They wondered whether the law was becoming something flexible, something that could be shaped to fit different political needs rather than something steady and predictable. The media played a large role in how these decisions were understood. Certain reporters and commentators highlighted the potential consequences of each ruling. They would analyze the possible effects on elections, the powers of the presidency, or the responsibilities of officials. While these explanations were intended to inform, the tone was often serious, sometimes urgent. The public absorbed this tone, and it influenced how people talked about the court in everyday life. Meanwhile, legal scholars tried to explain the reasoning behind the rulings. They spoke about constitutional interpretation, judicial philosophy, and legal tradition. For those who studied law, these conversations were familiar. However, for many ordinary people, the legal explanations felt complicated. They did not always know how to interpret the reasoning, so they focused instead on how the rulings made them feel. Debate became less about law and more about identity, trust, and the future of the country. Some people began to ask a simple but powerful question: is the court still neutral? They wondered whether the court was acting independently or responding to pressures, even if only indirectly. Others pushed back against this doubt, arguing that questioning the court was unfair and could damage its ability to function. To them, the court was a stable part of the government, and the country needed stability more than ever. The court itself did not speak publicly about these conversations. The judges rarely made personal statements outside of legal opinions. They continued their work quietly, but their silence sometimes made people even more curious. People wanted reassurance, clarity, something that could remind them that the court was still steady. Yet the nature of the court meant it did not offer comfort through words, only through decisions. This left the public to interpret everything themselves. One example of how complicated the situation became was seen in discussions at workplaces, social gatherings, and community events. When someone mentioned a recent court decision, the room sometimes grew tense. People would listen carefully, choosing their words, unsure whether they could speak openly without upsetting someone. A single sentence could reveal how someone felt about Trump, the court, or the country's direction, and others might react emotionally. Teachers noticed this in classrooms. Students had opinions, sometimes strong ones, but they also felt unsure how to discuss them respectfully. Community leaders tried to create spaces for calm discussion, reminding people that listening was as important as speaking. Some conversations went well, with people engaging thoughtfully. Others struggled, ending in silence or discomfort. Despite the tension, there was still curiosity. People wanted to understand what these rulings meant on a practical level. They wondered, how would these decisions shape the next election? Would they change how future presidents made decisions? Would they affect how much influence a president could have after leaving office? These questions were not just about politics. They linked to larger thoughts about leadership, fairness, and the meaning of responsibility. People asked themselves what kind of country they wanted to live in. They wondered how rules and laws should work in a society where opinions were so strongly divided. Some believed that the court was doing what it needed to do to clarify legal boundaries. Others believed the court was stepping into a conversation that required more public voices, more open discussion, and more shared understanding. Throughout all of this, Donald Trump continued to respond to the rulings in his own way. He spoke about them in interviews, speeches, and online statements. His words were confident, sometimes optimistic, and they encouraged his supporters to remain energetic and hopeful. Those who supported him saw the rulings as part of a larger story in which he had faced challenges, but continued to stand firm. At the same time, those who opposed him interpreted his responses differently. They felt that his statements added intensity to an already emotional moment. They hoped for more calm, more reflection, and more distance from conflict. The court's rulings did not create these differences, but they brought them into sharper focus. The situation was like a mirror reflecting the deeper feelings that had been growing in the country for years. People realized that the legal system did not exist separate from society. It was connected to the hopes, fears, and beliefs of the people who lived within it. As the story continued, the influence of the court remained steady. Each decision stirred new conversations, new reactions, and new reflections. The public waited for the next step, unsure of where the path was leading. The court was still a central force in the unfolding story, and Trump's presence made every development feel more significant. The nation watched closely, knowing that the future was not determined by one person, one institution, or one moment. It was shaped over time, by millions of voices, by decisions both quiet and loud, and by the steady unfolding of events that touched every part of society. As the Supreme Court's decisions continued to draw national attention, Donald Trump recognized how powerful the moment was. He had always understood how public conversation worked. He knew how to speak in ways that captured people's emotions, whether they agreed with him or not. Now, with the court's rulings influencing how people were thinking, he began to shape a clear message that would guide his supporters and challenge his critics. Trump appeared confident, steady, and sure of his direction. Whenever he spoke, whether it was at a rally, in interviews, or on social media, he discussed the rulings with a tone that suggested certainty. His words had rhythm and pace, and he used them to create a story of his own journey. He described himself not as a figure who was fighting for personal power, but as someone who was standing up for what he believed was the truth. His supporters listened closely. They admired the way he spoke directly, without hesitation or hesitation. To them, he seemed strong, resilient, and unshaken by criticism. They felt that the rulings from the Supreme Court confirmed what they had believed for a long time, that Trump had faced challenges not because he had done something wrong, but because he refused to back down from what he saw as necessary for the country. Rallies began to feel more energetic than before. People traveled long distances to hear him speak. They brought homemade signs, shirts, and hats. Some came to show their support silently. Others came with excitement, talking to people around them about their shared beliefs. For many, these gatherings were not just political events. They were moments of connection. They felt like part of something larger than themselves. Trump understood this well. He did not speak only about policies or legal matters. He spoke about feelings, frustration, hope, loyalty, and pride. He knew that people responded to emotion just as strongly as they responded to facts. When he spoke about the Supreme Court rulings, he framed them as evidence that the system was beginning to recognize fairness again. It was a narrative that made his supporters feel validated, respected, and encouraged. Meanwhile, the media watched every moment carefully. News networks analyzed his speeches, studying his tone, his gestures, and the reactions of the crowds. Commentators discussed what his words meant for the future of elections and public opinion. Some analysts believed that Trump was successfully strengthening his base. Others argued that his messaging created deeper divisions in society. This difference in interpretation only added to the sense of separation between groups of people in the country. At home, families sometimes listened to the same speech and understood it in completely different ways. One person might hear strength while another might hear concern. One person might feel hopeful while another might feel uneasy. These differences did not always lead to arguments, but they did create quiet emotional spaces that were hard to bridge. In workplaces, break rooms and office corridors became places of careful conversation. People spoke about the news in gentle, cautious tones, trying not to say something that might make coworkers uncomfortable. Yet the topic was hard to avoid. It was the kind of news that carried emotion with it. Schools and colleges saw a similar effect. Students were aware of what was happening, and they brought questions to their teachers. Some wanted clarity, others wanted understanding. Educators tried their best to guide discussions respectfully, reminding students to listen to each other even when they disagreed. It was not easy, but many hoped that these conversations would teach young people the importance of thoughtful dialogue. Meanwhile, public opinion surveys began to show noticeable shifts. Trump's supporters became more confident in their views. His critics became more certain in their concerns. People on each side believed strongly in the importance of their perspective. What made the moment especially delicate was that both groups felt they were protecting something meaningful, whether it was stability, fairness, or the future of the country. Trump continued to shape his message carefully. In interviews, he spoke about how the rulings reflected fairness. When discussing critics, he kept his tone firm, not angry. He said that disagreement was part of democracy, and that he understood why some people might feel unsure. This approach helped him appear steady and controlled, which further strengthened his support among those who already admired him. Behind the scenes, campaign teams worked continuously. They studied public reactions and adjusted the language of speeches accordingly. They planned events in places where support was strong and where interest was rising. They encouraged volunteers to connect with communities, reminding them to speak respectfully and listen as much as they spoke. These efforts were not just about gaining new supporters. They were about building trust and belonging among those who already believed in him. At the same time, those who opposed Trump also became more active. They organized discussions, wrote articles, and participated in community meetings. Many believed it was important to express their concerns thoughtfully and calmly. They did not want to create more division. Instead, they hoped to encourage understanding of why they felt the way they did. Their message was not rooted in dislike, but in a desire for stability and clarity. This created two large groups in the country, both deeply invested in what was happening. The Supreme Court had not intended to create such strong emotional reactions. Its decisions had been based on legal reasoning. Yet as those decisions entered public life, they took on new meaning, shaped by the voices, feelings, and experiences of millions of people. Trump, aware of this, continued using language that encouraged his supporters to feel proud and united. He reminded them that the future was not yet written, and that each person played a role in shaping it. He spoke about participation, engagement, and belief. These ideas gave his supporters a sense of purpose. For many, this sense of purpose was something they needed. It helped them feel connected during a time when the world felt uncertain. It helped them feel seen during a moment when public conversation was crowded and loud. It helped them believe that their voices mattered. Even those who disagreed with Trump understood the significance of this emotional connection. They could see how his messaging created community. They recognized that political influence was not just about laws and votes, but about meaning, belonging, and identity. The country continued forward, with Trump shaping the narrative, the Supreme Court holding its position, and the public responding in countless ways. The story was still unfolding. The outcome was not clear, but one thing was certain. People were paying attention, more closely than ever before, and the next chapter of the story would depend not only on leaders and institutions, but on the everyday decisions, conversations, and feelings of ordinary people